start by identifying all of those as based on everything we can gather from the needs assessment, and then we begin to prioritize them and identify which corridors have the best potential to support these higher capacity modes of public transportation. I'll let James do the second part.
The question on the BNSF is, this is the corridor that comes from downtown and goes just south of the airport. If you stand anywhere near the Brady District, you'll see that there's a lot of trains that go through that corridor. And we'll be looking at that as an option. It's something that we've looked at in the past and have sort of come to the preliminary conclusion, I guess, that the capacity on that rail corridor is so much greater than any of the other rail corridors that we have in terms of freight, that it would be more difficult to do anything in that corridor than any of the others. There's about 25 trains a day on that corridor, so about an average of about 1 an hour. And so it's not that it's impossible to develop that corridor, but there's other corridors that have a lot greater potential in terms of being able to use the existing right-of-way. So.
All right. What are the options for funding or financing mass transit? Put Mike on the spot there.
Well, obviously, it'd be desirable if we could find a way for the users to fund it, but that's not really a fair allocation either, because even though there are people who may never ride transit, they still benefit from it being available within the community, especially when it becomes as successful as some of the models we pointed to, and what that can do for the community. Obviously, some of these big projects, big programs, cost significant amounts of dollars. How do we determine a plan that's within our means, something that's affordable, and how do we decide to pay for it? A big potential source are the federal dollars. Currently, there's about a 50-50 match of federal dollars available for qualifying projects of this type. That's how the major systems around the country that you see in other communities have been funded. The other 50% of it is local funds, and typically the fare box only supports maybe 10% of the operating costs, 10 to 25% of the operating costs for a system. The capital cost it doesn't even begin to offset. So you look at a variety of local funding sources. About 70% of the transit authorities around the country are utilizing a form of sales tax. Mayor McCrory told us that in Charlotte they passed a half-cent local option sales tax dedicated to their transit system, and that has provided the funding to support the development of what Charlotte has today. The City of Oklahoma City has their MAPS tax, which is a 1% sales tax renewed for, in this case, 7 years to pay the capital cost of not only their streetcar system, but other projects included in MAPS. Streetcar is only about 1/7 of the total program for MAPS that they're undertaking now. Dallas has a 1-cent local option sales tax. Fort Worth has a half-cent. So you look around the country and you find a variety of different formulas. It depends on the desires of the community, the region. Mayor McCrory used the term that you have to come to a grand compromise of what are the municipalities and the counties willing to do and to sacrifice or to accept as a means of funding these types of programs. There are a lot of innovative sources that can also be used, tax increment districts, special assessment districts, advertising income from advertising in stations and on vehicles, just a wide variety. Portland undertook the development of their transit system, they had, one thing that sticks in mind is they used a combination of 23 different funding sources. So you tend to reach out and grab for everything you can to try to minimize the pain and get the maximum benefit off of the available resource that can be dedicated to the program.
Yeah, and I don't know if this was clarified in James's presentation, but as part of this study, we've got a financial expert on the team that's going to be analyzing what we think is the most appropriate funding for Tulsa in this region. And there's a little bit more information about that over there on the board, but we will be looking at that as part of this project.
You kind of answered my question, looking at it. In Tulsa, what's the biggest political obstacle you have to doing something like that, number one? And secondly, you kind of alluded to that, like how other cities would handle it, by having these tax rates or adding a little bit of value added or whatever, 23 methods to increase funding or something like that. But has there been any way so far, in any studies so far, that puts Tulsa says, hey, this is what we ought to do?
Well, I think, I guess the thing that I think Mayor McCrory talked about today is in terms of, the political obstacles, I guess if you want to call it that, is recognizing that if you don't do anything, if you sit still and don't do anything, your competition, meaning other regions that are competing for talent and jobs and all the things that make an economy run, will run over you. And so I think understanding it from that point of view, that it's not just about a train or a bus, but it's about competing nationally with other places that are trying to retain and attract jobs, high quality jobs. So that's sort of I think that's something that we all want in terms of our economy. Sorry, the second part of the question, it was hard for me to hear.
We're just like, has the study done anything to see what Tulsa would do yet in those terms?
Has the study seen anything that Tulsa is going to do for the funding?
Identified anything Tulsa would do?
Well, I think, that was what I was explaining. We will be looking at that as part of the study. And I should mention too, that we haven't really put a lot of emphasis on this, but we've done a lot of research, in-depth interviews, random phone polling in the region. And there was some questions asked about funding and what the citizens of this area would be willing to fund. And some of those results, I think, are fairly interesting and surprising. And we'll be, I guess in February, be releasing those. And I think everybody will find those to be quite enlightening. So.
I've got one.
I was curious if the projections of ridership have any calculations that take into account the Generation Y that was mentioned earlier, how they are not oriented toward their car like Generation X or previous generations were, and that would be an opportunity for increased ridership in public transportation.
I would say to a certain extent, the way travel demand models work is essentially they look at population and the way that population is comprised in terms of those demographics, and it also looks at employment. And the sort of basic concept is that the greater concentration of jobs, the greater attraction there will be for trips, both transit and vehicular trips. And so to the extent that the demographics are accounted for within that travel demand model, yes, if that makes sense.
Let me interject and ask one real quick. This gentleman here had heard what Pat McCrory said earlier about there being a measurable economic development impact from mass transit. So could you guys speak to that, whether it be the same effect, or what are sort of those side or secondary economic development impacts from transit?
We talked about this a little bit this afternoon as well. One thing that the Federal Transit Administration has done in recent years in terms of evaluating the competitiveness of funding, in terms of when you put your application together for federal funding, they now also look at transit-supported land use as part of their evaluation criteria. A few years ago, that wasn't even in there. So your ridership model didn't get to look forward in terms of what kind of development might be happening around transit. They're now allowing that, not only the ridership model to include that, but if the city has moved ahead and started planning and allowed transit-supported zoning, such as mixed-use zoning around stations, and once the station areas are identified, they've done a development plan, possibly changing the zoning or doing transit overlays to allow higher density. They actually put that into the formula part of the evaluation, so it can make you much more competitive when you're looking at other cities that may not have done that. So it's getting to the point where the feds really understand how much transit-oriented development or mixed-use development can increase ridership and really support a system.
As far as transit-oriented development is concerned, is it better to put your transit where you want development to occur, or is it better to put the corridors and the lines in where you already have really strong development and really high density?
Yes. Those are both wonderful options. Let me start that with a story. There's been several agencies or several transit districts, including, we take San Diego as an example, that their first corridor, and Dallas did the same thing, put in their corridor where it was the most cost-effective to do it. They had no money. They used an existing rail corridor that went through an industrial district to connect San Diego to the border, provided some ridership, but no development ever happened, and it was because they put the corridor in the wrong place. They didn't plan it for development, they just planned it where it would be the cheapest. They've since gotten the idea, rightly so, that you need to put transit where it will support development. So there's two methodologies that both need to be applied. One is, where can you put transit to support existing development, especially when it's high concentration areas such as events, civic centers, airports, although airports don't work as well in the ridership model. We're really providing transit access to existing facilities. The other one is to really look at where you have economic development opportunities and where you want those pockets of economic development to grow and try to bring transit to it. And sometimes that's hard to do because it's easy to put transit, we're talking about light rail, so to speak, in an existing railroad corridor. And maybe that corridor is not in the right place. So that's got to be part of the analysis that we'll be going through. How does that affect ridership? What does it cost to get there? And then what is the return on investment from a transit-oriented development standpoint, an economic development standpoint, that will come back to the city through tax revenues and so forth, that can help pay not only for the system, but for fire stations and police service and trash collection and everything else that helps support the city overall. So you've got to look at both of those, and that'll be part of not only the model, the ridership model, but the financial model and the economic development model that drives these opportunities. Now there are other modes, such as streetcar, that typically runs in streets, which gives you a little more flexibility of serving those areas. And so you've got to look at all those together as a comprehensive system.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm a club owner in the New Pearl District. What are the times that these buses or trains would be running? Will it be a 24-hour one?
At this level, you know, we're at the transit system plan level. There is a piece of this that we'll be looking at the existing bus system and some sort of short-term improvements on that. You may or may not know that the existing Tulsa Transit bus system runs until about 7 p.m. and then there's a night line, but it's a very limited service. There's no service on Sundays, and Saturdays is limited service. And so in terms of the improvements that can be made, and in fact I think if you're holding a yellow piece of paper, it's a survey, then one of the questions is what are some of the things that would encourage you to ride transit more, and one of them is service hours. Right. And so there's very few systems in the country that operate 24 hours a day. But there are many that operate until 1 or 2 in the morning. In fact, Mayor McCrory was just talking about that today. They have an entertainment district near their downtown, and there's people that are packed onto that at 1 o'clock in the morning. So in terms of those opportunities, sure. I mean, there's opportunities to do that. I think that it would have to be there would probably be certain areas of town where that would make more sense, and those would have to be examined. But yeah, I mean, service hours is a very